welcome to the B. Washington Interactive Theater. Soon, it will be your turn to test your leadership and decision-making skills in a crisis General Washington faced during the Revolutionary War. Here's the situation. It is the fall of 1782. We've been at war with the British for over 7 years. Peace negotiations are underway after our decisive victory in Yorktown, Virginia the year before. But all is not well among the officers of the Continental Army. Throughout the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army has suffered shortages of food and supplies. Congress has struggled repeatedly to pay the men. Some are owed years of back pay. There's not much General Washington can do other than write letters on behalf of his soldiers.
General Lincoln, I will inform you candidly of the discontents which at this moment prevail universally throughout the Army. The complaint of evils are the total want of money, the heavy debts they have already incurred, the distress of their families at home, and the prospect of poverty and misery before them. The patience and long sufferance of the Army are almost exhausted. There never was so great a spirit of discontent as at this instant.
In March of 1783, the Continental Army is camped 60 miles north of New York City, which is still under British occupation. Although peace negotiations are underway, the Army is still needed to defend against potential British attack. But within the officers' ranks, discontent is growing. Some fear that if the war is to end before Congress can settle its debts, they will return home impoverished. Some officers decide to take matters into their own hands.
Gentlemen, what's this about? It's an anonymous address to the officers of the Continental Army.
Gentlemen, a fellow soldier whose future may be as desperate as yours would beg me to address you. Have you not more than once suggested your wishes and made known your wants to Congress? How have you been answered? If this be your treatment while you wear the swords necessary for the defense of America, what then can you expect when peace arrives?
But if your spirit should revolt at this, to oppose tyranny under whatever garb it may assume, then awake, attend to situation in any political event.
The Army has an alternative. The author proposes that the Army threaten to refuse to lay down its weapons in use of peace, or refuse to defend the country from attack. He has called for a meeting tomorrow at 11 o'clock to discuss his proposal.
The authors of the anonymous letter have called a meeting without General Washington's approval to discuss threatening the government and to repaying the soldiers. You are about to step into the boots of General Washington. As Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, will you arrest the authors of the anonymous letter for treason? Will you try to convince the officers to ignore the inflammatory letter and continue to remain patient? Or will you use your influence as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army to pressure Congress to act? Just like General Washington, you will have to make the decision under pressure as the situation continues to evolve. You'll be able to seek advice from various advisors who will represent people and sources General Washington would have consulted. But be aware, they will offer contradictory opinions, and you will not have time to hear from everyone. It will be up to you alone to decide how strongly you agree or disagree with their advice, and whether they will impact your decision as the commander of the Continental Army. Now is your chance to be Washington. It's your turn to lead.
A country that ignores the needs of its veterans will fail. Great men who have proven their worth and can be trusted with power have a responsibility to create balance in times of crisis and inaction. A virtuous army who've bled in the name of liberty can be a balancing source of power. Cross the Rubicon and expel the corrupt legislators. Support your officers and pressure the legislature to act.
trust that the army will exercise the patient forbearance which had hitherto so honorably distinguished them. Once all confidence between the civil and military authority is lost, Rubicon is passed, to retreat will be very difficult. If the army acts on their threats, I fear for the country. Make sure that the army does not pursue any foolish course. As commander of the Continental Army, I implore you to convince your officers to remain patient.
This crisis can help us strengthen the American Union. The officers and soldiers suffer because Congress does not have the authority to tax the states. Now is the time to act. The claims of the Army, urged with moderation but with firmness, may operate on those weak lines in Congress. By threatening Congress, we may help them to gain the necessary power to tax, and we will gain just compensation for the officers and soldiers.
I consider the reputation of the American Army as one of the most immaculate things on earth. And
news has reached Philadelphia that the British have approved the preliminary articles of peace. How peace treaty could be not far off.
If Congress does not settle its debts to the officers before the treaty is signed, we may be on the verge of war.
News of peace could inflame the officers to act on the threats in the anonymous letter before the army is disbanded and they are sent home penniless. Will this affect your decision? You now have 3 new advisors to hear from.
we should even suffer wrongs and injuries to the utmost verge of toleration, rather than sully it in the least degree. The influence of the army is a sharp point, which I hope in God will never be directed but against the enemies of the liberties of America.
Our families fled Long Island over 6 years ago, when the enemy obtained possession of our land. We had no other means of subsistence than to serve the army laundering clothes, while our husbands fought on the field of battle. It is the only way we have been able to feed our children and keep our families together. If pay is withheld from our husbands, we must all starve together, or commit acts which may involve us in ruin. We don't want charity, only fair pay for honest work. Do not let Congress abandon us now. General Washington, support your officers and pressure Congress to act.
To be tame and unprovoked when injuries press hard upon you is more than weakness. Have you not more than once made your wishes known to Congress? If this is how they treat us while we wear the swords in defense of America, then what can we expect once peace comes? How can we consent to be the only sufferers of this revolution, to starve and be forgotten? General Washington, use your position of strength as
Second anonymous address was discovered with the general orders this morning. Claims General Washington supports the threats to Congress.
Well, how is that, sir? He did not condone the demands of this meet.
Gentlemen, I think you all know why we are here.
Gentlemen, I apologize for my appearance, but the situation has rendered it necessary that I give my sentiments to the Army directly.
You may consult your advisors one last time, but make haste. You're running out of time to weigh your options.
commander of the Continental Army and pressure Congress to act.
Time's up. Your advisors have spoken. This is a reflection of how much the room agreed or disagreed with their advice. As commander of the Continental Army, it is up to you alone to make the decision. Will you arrest the conspirators for treason? Will you convince the officers to remain patient? Or will you use your influence and pressure Congress to act? You have 10 seconds to cast your vote, starting now. The results are in. The majority voted to support the officers and pressure Congress to act. A bold choice. Now let's find out what General Washington decided to do.
This dreadful alternative of either deserting our country in the extremest hour of distress or turning our army against it, which is their parent object, has something so shocking in it that humanity revolts at the idea. My God, what could this writer have in view by recommending such measures? Can he be a friend to this army? Can he be a friend to this country? Or rather, is he not an insidious foe? Let me conjure you in the name of our common country to express your utmost horror and detestation of the man who wishes under any specious pretense to overturn the liberties of our country and deluge our rising empire in blood. I would like to read to you a letter from the Virginia Congressman Joseph Jones, who has become a fast friend of this army. Gentlemen, I beg your indulgence. I have grown gray in your service and now find myself going blind. Those acquainted with the deliberations of public bodies, and especially of so mixed a body as that of Congress, will understand that allowances must be made for slow determination. I am pleased to report that 7 states have voted for 5 years whole pay to the Army, and we hope to get the last 2 votes soon.
Shortly after Washington left the meeting, the officers passed a resolution vowing to ignore the threats in the anonymous letter and to remain patient. Washington's speech would become known as the Newburgh Address. 6 months later,
that one, babe.
the Treaty of Paris was signed and the revolution was officially over. America's first army peacefully disbanded, and Congress ultimately passed legislation for payment to the soldiers and officers. Before the year ended, General Washington resigned as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and returned to Mount Vernon as a civilian. Through his words and actions, General Washington set the precedent that America's Army is and always will be under the control of our civilian government.